Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to African Do episode 7. It's a pleasure to be back. We've taken a decision to record more in December. It's the festive season, and I think you'll have more time to sit down and consume podcasts. So we've taken this initiative to record more than one episode. So we'll be doing about 3 episodes this month, and we're looking forward to it. Today we have a very, very interesting guest. I don't know how to describe him, but let me say, overarchingly, he's a storyteller.
Yes.
Yeah. And then after being a storyteller, you can add in the other acronyms. He's a content producer. He's a producer of different types of animated. He's an animator. He's an illustrator. He's an artist, and other interesting things that we'll unpack in this episode. So my guest today is Chief Nyamweya, who comes, as you can hear, the very interesting name to start with. So Chief, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I'm glad to be on the African Do podcast.
Excellent, and we're glad to have you.
Thank you.
So we can start by maybe, let me take you back and say that I think the thing that, as I was doing my research on you, I start with the fact that you're a lawyer.
Yes.
and not just in words,
Yes.
you know. You're a lawyer, complete, trained, uni, School of Law, finished.
Yes. 8th intake, University of Nairobi.
8th intake.
Yes.
So maybe you can tell us a bit about that, how from becoming a lawyer, you now end up as a content producer, African entrepreneur and illustrator. Yeah.
It's quite similar to your last guest, actually, Navalayo.
Yes.
She was both a lawyer and accountant, if I remember correctly.
Yes, she was.
And I was the same.
Okay.
We were doing it simultaneously. So it was actually not an uncommon thing where you study law in the evening and during the day you're doing ACCA, accounting, or some others would be doing CPA.
Okay.
And the idea was that those are two essential pillars of any corporate organization.
Yes.
So if you have those, it's job security. That was the thinking of the people who advised me.
Okay.
So that's what I did. I graduated 2007, 8 there, around that period. And it was an accident of timing that I happened to graduate around a very tumultuous time in Kenya's history.
Okay.
So the job market wasn't great. There was also a lot of time for introspection and looking around. And for me, it was also the thing that, you've invested your the last 5-6 years, if you count also going to Kenya School of Law, thinking about law and the rule of law. And of course, a bit of that is governance. And then you see all of that evaporate. You see the rule of law evaporate.
Yes.
And you realize how fickle this thing is, that it depends on the consensus of the society as a whole. So I limped on for another 2 years doing my pupillage, working a little bit, training, doing various internships. But it had already been wounded in my head. The idea that this was a very stable structure had already been broken. And I had this idea that there's so much knowledge that we are exposed to in the academy, that is locked out of the general public.
Okay.
We call ourselves learned friends, and you're inside this ivory tower, and there's so much useful information that needed to get out there. Like our history, for example, how we ended up where we ended up.
Yes.
And I felt that it needs to escape the academy and go into a more popular, format. So my first graphic novel, which I did in 2010, was actually about that. It was history. So I did a kind of fictionalized history of Dedan Kimathi.
Yes.
Called Emergency. And the whole idea was just to track his life before the emergency starts in 52.
Okay.
So like being a veteran from the Second World War, he arrives at the railway station and he's trying to find his way, and like what leads up to the decision for them to go to the forest. So I was, and it was very important to me that it be done in a comic book format as a graphic novel in a way that's very popular and easy for people to consume, not something that's like an academic paper.
So you study law.
Yes.
But you've always been, as a child, you were keen,
always
graphic,
yes.
You are drawing. But
yes.
at no time in your childhood and through your early education into uni, did you think that was a career choice?
I mean, the career did not exist.
Yes.
Yeah, at the time, of course, and I would put myself in your bracket as well.
Yes.
For us, there was just like, you could count the career choices on one hand.
Agreed.
It's lawyer, doctor,
engineer,
engineer,
architect.
pharmacist, architect, etc.
Yes.
the basics.
Yes.
And so I can't even really blame my parents. We were just taking the options that were available.
True.
So by the time I was graduating, Kenya had started to open up. By this time, you've already seen the music industry start to open up. You have the Kalamashakas, you have, all of these things. And then I remember going to Sarit Center. This was actually in 2007, the year of my graduation.
Yeah.
And I go for a talk that's being hosted by Dan Muli at the Sarit Center for Just a Band. And they had just released an animated music video called The Way Nyopi.
Yes. I remember that.
Of a flying turtle. And my mind was just blown. Dan is my friend now. I always tell him this. He can't even believe,
Yeah.
And I was like, my God, these things were not there when I was going in. So I started to rethink. And I was like, life will start to foreclose. As you graduate, you get a family, you get children, and, your options start to close. It's like a narrowing funnel. So I was like, before this funnel narrows to a close, I have a few short years in which I can make a radical decision. Do I want to do this insane thing of becoming an artist? Or do I want to go ahead? And you can imagine my parents were, they had their misgivings. You've invested all this time and money.
Confusion.
You've invested all this time and money going in this direction. Then you go and cartoon. You have to draw cartoons, So but I was quite stubborn about it, and I knew that I had to make that choice now, or the option will not be there in the future. So I took that direction. And
so how did you then? I can see how your misgivings about the law were triggered by post-election violence. That's 2007, 2008. As a young man straight out of uni, now you've studied the law. It's all about order, systems, based on English common law. And you're like, okay. And you come out and you see the imperfections of that, because we found ourselves as a nation in this situation. And how did you then transition that to kind of your first story that you're talking about, Emergency, is a bit of an untold story. We hear even Dedan Kimathi, the way was taught to us in school, was very, I dare say, sanitized, and not so much about the person, his history, his past. It's almost like he was a Mau Mau fighter then. So how did you connect those two worlds to start telling those stories that are a bit different?
Around that time, the book Britain's Gulag had been published. I think it was 2008, 2008-9 there. There was also Histories of the Hanged. So there was all these books, and people had started to become curious about this history. So there was available material for us to study and to look. So what you do from a creative standpoint is that you look at all this information, put it on a timeline, and see where the gaps are, where the opportunities are for creative license,
in
which you can dramatize it and put it into a dramatic format.
Okay.
So there was all this material becoming available. And I think around the same time, a court case was also taking place.
Yes, the famous court case, the Mau Mau in the UK, yes.
Yeah, so all of that was the context in which I was doing this.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't in a vacuum.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've become a storyteller. Yeah. But what was the reception of the first story by the market?
It was so good.
Yeah,
it was so good. It was
good. Good in terms of people wanting to hear the story, or good in terms of you being able to monetize it, and then say,
definitely not monetized.
Not monetized, definitely, but the reception
good in terms of there was a lot of online enthusiasm, reception. I used to get tons of comments. I did it over the space of a month and a half.
Yeah.
I researched the book for the entire year of 2010, but it got published in October. So there was a lot of buzz around it online, even so far as Questlove of The Roots, if you're a hip hop fan, even commenting about this.
Yes.
So there was a lot of buzz,
but
there was no route to monetization at that time.
Yeah. And where were you? How did you distribute it?
I just created a website.
With
my friend Nahabi Wandera. He created a website for me, and also really basic. We were just teaching ourselves this as we went along. He taught himself After Effects in order to make an animated trailer for it.
Okay.
Just in one night. I saw him do that in one night. A real genius.
Yeah.
So once that happened, because of the buzz that happened around Emergency, I actually got a call from Victor Ndula, who was doing a comic with the Star at the time. And he told me, hey, my boss wants to see you. So I ended up actually doing a 6 to 8 panel comic for the Star after that. It was called Roba.
Roba, yeah.
And it ran for about 4 years.
Yes.
But then, comics is hard work. That was good in terms of like I had an income, a pretty good income, and I was single. I was able to pay my bills and have some disposable income.
So you became an employee?
Yeah, I became
of the Star.
Pretty much, I would say a consultant.
The consultant,
yes.
Cartoonist, so to speak.
So that's how the career was able to proceed beyond that.
Okay.
But then, obviously, it takes a toll. You can imagine doing 5 days a week, doing an 8-panel comic, and you have to think of the story.
It was daily in the
daily
paper.
Except the weekend.
Okay.
So that's basically 20 days out of a month, and you're doing that for 4 years.
Yeah.
So, I started to burn out, and I started to ask myself, like, with this skill that I've started to develop, because comic books are complicated. You're basically doing the environment design, the character design. You're the screenwriter. You're also doing cinematography, figuring out how one panel leads to another.
Yes.
So it takes a toll. It's I wouldn't compare it even to doing an editorial cartoon in which you're doing just one image. You're doing 8 images that are related to each other.
Yes.
And so I started to think, what else is adjacent to this, that is close to this, that I can transfer my skills that wouldn't burn me out to the same degree.
Okay.
And luckily, I met another animator around this time, a guy who had just studied in South Africa. His name was Hato.
Yeah.
And we were able to... Kenyan, of course, yes.
Yeah.
So we were able to start an animation studio. It was called Tsunami. So, of course, the idea was the same thing, like, telling popular storytelling. We wanted to tell our own stories, drama, crime fiction, the sort of stuff that we were interested in. And just to give you some context, a lot of the stories that we were growing up consuming about ourselves were mostly NGO funded. So it was about, social messaging, use contraception, these type of things.
Yes.
And people... Audiences are much more sophisticated than we give them credit for. People know when they're being preached at.
Agreed.
And so we didn't want to make that type of media. We wanted to make stuff that was just fun.
Yeah.
Hato was a big lover of anime, of course. And, anime heads are really fanatical.
Agreed.
So that was the energy that we went into this new company with. And so I started to move away from comics. I ended up leaving the gig with the Star to just focus on comics.
So what did you do? Teach yourself? Because now
to just focus on animation.
You've moved now to animation, which is computer generated.
Yes.
And you have moved away from
doing comics.
You're an illustrator.
Yes.
So how do you make that transition?
So I didn't have to, because Hato had the skills as an animator. And he also had a few friends who are also animators.
Yes.
So using that, I was able to leverage my skills from the storytelling standpoint, from drawing comics, which are basically really elaborate storyboards.
Yes.
Storyboards being like basically a script that is turned into images.
Okay.
So using that, we were able to combine our skills and now make the studio.
And you started producing.
Yes, so we started producing.
So now you have transitioned.
Yes.
Lawyer, you have made a fast comic, can't monetize.
Yes.
Get a job, work 4 years in that. And now you're starting to figure out, you're in the game, so to speak.
Yeah. So this is around 2013 there, between 2013 and 2016.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have a seat at the table. You know the lingo.
Which table? We built the table. There was no table.
Of course. There was no table of an animation type in the market. But now let's move forward to closer to modern day. Yeah.
Yes.
You do Tsunami with your friend, and you're now, I would say, you're on the journey to mainstreaming in the sense that you can have conversations. And what kind of work are you doing?
So around this time is actually when we met each other.
Yes.
I was actually taking on a more producer role, the more business side of things, looking for clients, and Hato was more on the creative direction side.
Okay.
And those who know me know that I wasn't really well suited to being a producer. I mean, I understand numbers, I understand like balance sheets and all of that, but it's not. It wouldn't be my first choice. It's not my first instinct. I'm much more on the creative side, but someone had to do it.
Yes.
So I did a lot of that. I joined Sunny Bindra's Fast Forward.
Yes.
Just basically increasing the networking in the Kenyan corporate scene because that's where we imagine that's where the capital is that would be able to, then people would be interested in funding stories for their companies and that type of thing.
Yeah.
So we ended up doing a bit of that, so we've done all manner of clients you can imagine, from doing information about insurance, financial literacy, curricula, turning that into animation, from, all types of messaging. Literally everybody needs to tell a story.
Yes.
And visual storytelling is the most effective type of storytelling. I'll give you a really concrete example. If you're in like, let's say a construction site, and you have people speaking different languages. Say you have a Chinese manager, you have, people speaking all different languages. Can you find a very efficient way of telling somebody how to tie a fishing knot? You can tell somebody in English, which will exclude the non-English, because you can say it in Kiswahili, which will exclude the non-Kiswahili speakers, or you can say it in Chinese, exclude all the others, or you can just have diagrams explaining how to make the fishing knot. It's so efficient, and it crosses across all languages, all cultures, everything. So that's the power of visual storytelling, and everybody needs that. Doesn't matter if it's a corporate, doesn't matter if it's a social enterprise, everybody needs that, even politicians. So we did that for a long time, but then what ended up happening is that I went into a crisis. I was like, what I came into this industry was not to be a tool for various
corporates to use.
Basically, I didn't come in to do advertising or this type of thing. I came in to do storytelling, like pure storytelling. So it really took us into a crisis. So we decided to take a break also. And also we found that what we had imagined, or what I had imagined, the error that I had made, we thought that the pinnacle was having corporate clients. But then what you end up learning is that these are not necessarily the people who best understand the value of our medium. And they don't necessarily value both monetary as well as, purpose-wise. They don't understand it the most. They have the most difficulty understanding why the budgets are as they are, why it takes as much time as it does. And we found that maybe there's a mismatch. Maybe this is not where we need to be. So I needed to take some time to kind of understand the ecosystem that I was working in, and, what its purpose was. So that was during the time that I actually wrote my first really long graphic novel, over 100 pages. It was called The Art of Unlearning. Because I wanted to unlearn all the prejudices and assumptions with which I had come into this industry with. And I showed you the manuscript just as we were preparing. And during that time also, I took some time. I went into an incubator in San Francisco to the US. It was called Singularity University. And I was able to mix with entrepreneurs of all different kinds, people very far from my field. It was a very rigorous application process, very competitive. I was even surprised when I made it in, because there weren't many people from the creative side of things. You had biotech people in there, you had AI people in there, it was very, very early days of drone and all this different type. People from all over the world.
Where are we time-wise now?
Time-wise, this is 2016. In the summer of 2016. So that's when I went to San Francisco.
Crisis of conscience is what pushed you there, would you say?
That's what pushed me there. Because actually it was my father who pushed me, because he was like, you need to go back into study. You need to study some more. You've been doing all these experiments. Take some time and do some more studying. And this came along around that time. So I was very fortunate. I got to learn about the Silicon Valley approach to building businesses, and a lot of the things you discussed with Ken. And I learned that I learned their approach to entrepreneurship, and there were a lot of really useful skills that I learned from that. One thing that they understand really well is how to scale things, and how to always think about scale when you're starting. Whenever you start anything, always be thinking about
how can it reach more?
How to scale, and there's a structure to that, to how exponential growth works. And thinking from a very early stage, always being able to see 10 steps down the line how it can go on that curve. But then I also had critiques to that approach. I also came back from that with challenges, like how does that approach adapt to this context?
This context of ours.
This context being in Kenya. And there weren't many other people from Africa there. I think there was me, there was another South African guy, black South African guy, and an Egyptian. That was about it.
And how many are you in the program?
78 people.
Wow.
Yes.
And only 3 are African.
Okay. So it gave me a different lens into where we are, what we are doing. And it took me a while. I'd never even thought about things like political economy, for example, to understand like how what I was trying to do as an individual related to what the rest of humanity is doing and what the rest of the continent is doing. Because it's not intuitive to think at scale.
Yeah.
Most people, their intuition is to think about me and maybe my family. It's not intuitive to see how your place in the world is connected to everybody else and to the rest of the economy.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that I thought about and I pondered in my book, The Art of Unlearning.
Okay.
So it was self-published. And, self-publishing, it's really the only way to publish in Kenya when you're doing the type of media that we're doing, like comics, graphic novels, because we don't have publishers here. The publishers that we have are more focused on KICD, curricula, and, and that's where their bread and butter comes from. No blame on them. Like, if 95% of your revenue is coming from doing school books, why do you have to think about anything else? So they don't take a risk outside of that. So usually when you have, gifted writers, people like Binavanga, when they come into writing, they find themselves being in the position of a transport company that has to build the road.
Yes.
So like Binya had to build Kwani as a publishing company. And, so for us, it's self-publishing so far.
That's quite interesting that you use that analogy because if I digress a bit, I'll tell you about a friend of mine who's an agriculturalist. And he used a similar analogy with regards to Kenyan agriculture. And he was saying, you know what? You can get into, he told it, how did he tell it? He says, okay, you can decide to buy a matatu, and you run a matatu, yeah? But no one expects you to build a road.
Yes.
While in Kenyan agriculture, that's how he feels we're being held back. That the infrastructure to do the agriculture well, the farmer is expected to create. The dams and all that. There's no weather. So
it's in so many domains. Not even in tech, like companies that do like delivery. Companies like Sandy and them. It doesn't translate very well from the Silicon Valley model to here because there they have all houses have addresses. There's a functioning like postal network and all of that. Whereas here, a lot of the time they would have to be, going up and down the value chain to build all those connecting layers.
Yeah, but what I like about what I've heard about your story so far is that you come across to me as very self-reflective. So whether it is intentional or like you said, the last example you gave, it was your dad who triggered you and said that you've done all these experiments. And I think that's something that we need to inculcate more into ourselves as Africans because I don't believe that there are any bad experiences. I think there just is. Life is...
Provided you don't die.
Agreed. As long as you're still alive and breathing, life just happens. And if you can sit down and say, okay, I did this, I tried this, it went like this. What did I learn? What did I like? What didn't I like? What can I take out? What do I need to build more on? And what I've admired about you is that you've always invested in your knowledge. You never get there, so to speak. And that's something that's becoming almost a theme in the podcast because one of the things that we have to accept is this is our continent.
Yes.
But we are the ones going to change it, and changing it is going to take some introspection. And some of that introspection we may not like what we see, but it's the reality. And if we confront it, we can find a way to work around it. But now you've gone to Singularity. You've written your
Art of Unlearning.
Which would be great to say. I don't know when it'll be available.
Yes, I'm working on a second edition.
Excellent.
Yes, but as self-publishing goes, it's a little bit slower than I like, especially because I hope we get to this.
Yes.
I'm so deep in animation right now. Now I'm head, shoulders, knees, and toes in animation.
Kabisa.
But it's still something I think is important from a knowledge standpoint because it was more for like trying to document the learnings and trying to put them in a concise format that somebody else, even long after I've turned into fossils, they can still learn.
So you've done your 2016 Singularity. By 2018, I would assume thereabouts, you've written your graphic novel.
By that point, it's published.
You've published. You've got your head around things. Now, where do you move to from there?
So at this point, it's good to speak about my wife.
Yes.
and also the producer of Pulupa Productions.
When did she come into the picture?
So she comes into picture around this time when I come back from the US,
Singularity,
and I'm
yeah.
introspecting all these things.
Yes.
So even Art of Unlearning was a lot of the time conversation with
Yes.
her, because you need a sounding board to also
Yes.
give these ideas form. And I was trying to write the philosophy that would come to underpin Pulupa Productions, which we've created now,
Yes.
and Freehand Movement. So actually,
Yes.
the last chapter of Art of Unlearning is called Freehand Movement,
Yes.
which is the philosophy with which we built the company. And basically, the key learning that I leave with you'll kick me for being so basic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The key learning that I leave the US with is the importance of purpose.
Okay.
It is so critical to what we do as creative people.
Yes.
It is the ultimate.
So tell us a bit more about your purpose.
So purpose was what I realized I was doing wrong in my first attempts at doing an animation company, is that you were doing business with every Tom, Dick, Harry, Mary, Jane who would walk in and was willing to sign a check.
Yeah.
Really bad mistake. Because if you're going to tell stories and tell stories in a convincing way, you must believe them.
Agreed.
These must be stories that resonate with you first and foremost. Because I feel like human beings, we have mirror neurons. Even sitting as we are across each other right now speaking, you can tell if I try and defraud you, you know, or if I try and sell you BS.
Yes.
You can tell. So you have to be the first person who believes in what you're saying. So that, of course, precludes telling stories or interacting with organizations, telling stories that do not resonate with you.
Okay.
So we realize that we have to funnel, we have to narrow our scope, and tell the stories that we are interested in. And myself, I'm really interested in ecology, culture. And those are the things around which, you know, because my dad really loved trees.
Yes.
You know, everywhere he went, he turned it into a forest.
Okay.
You know, we even have a side hustle of doing bees, and it's all thanks to the fact that he planted so many trees in Kisii.
Okay.
You know, that it made bees thrive in that context. So I wanted to do stories that resonated with this, that can promote African culture and that can promote African ecology, and, you know, just make a paradise where we are.
So how do you then take that purpose which you have discovered about yourself and translate it into freehand movement?
Yes.
How
with freehand movement, we did a lot of work with social enterprises.
Yeah.
We did a lot of work with people who are doing food sovereignty, for example. One of my graphic novels, which I shared with you this morning, The Blind Spot, was all about that. It was a political drama about food sovereignty, about this place called Kajibora, where there's a revolution that happens, and the revolution is betrayed, and food is at the center of it.
Okay.
I do a lot of, and also it precludes the organization that you'd not want to work with. You know, like if there's an arms manufacturer, for example, I wouldn't want to work with such a company. You see,
regardless of the paycheck.
If you're just looking at the bottom line, you don't care whether it's an arms manufacturer, a fossil fuel company or whatever. So that was the main thing that we did with the freehand movement, where we had a bit more focus. And to our pleasant surprise, it was much more successful.
Okay.
Much more successful.
So there was money in the purpose.
Of course.
Yeah.
That's the irony, that when you take your eye off what you think is the shortest route to money, when you take your eye off that and you prioritize purpose, you're working with people who are aligned. You're working with people who are invested in the story. They're less fussy about budgets. You're able to do the type of work you want to do, the way you do it, and your quality goes up.
Did you find them or did they find you?
You find each other.
Okay.
They look for you, and you, a lot of the time it's them through word of mouth.
Yeah.
So we ended up doing a lot of that. And then also by 2019, we become parents. This is the big shift.
Yeah.
In all this time I've been working creatively, I've never thought about kids' content. It's so ironic. You're working in animation, but you've never thought about kids. But I become a parent myself.
Yes.
By the time my son is 2 years old, there's a crisis in the house. We have nothing to show them. In terms of content. I'm going online. I'd never thought about it. I'm going online. We are looking, and the closest thing that we can find to content we want to show our kids is coming from West Africa, coming from Congo, Burkina Faso, Comtine d'Afrique. Those who have kids, you might know about it. It's basically African songs. A lot of them are in Lingala and French. But for us, it was the closest thing to where we are in East Africa, that we were like, my God, we call ourselves Silicon Savannah. We can do this. You know, we have the songs, we have the skills, we know how to animate. We can do this. So that's now what turned our gaze now toward kids. You know, that we need to do something for our kids. And we came up with the idea of Uli and Tata. Uli being our partner Manu's daughter.
Yes.
Our partner Manu is a wildlife filmmaker, animator. He's just a creative octopus.
Okay.
He learns so many different things, and he's also a National Geographic fellow. His daughter is called Uli,
Yeah.
and our son is called. His nickname was Tata because
Yeah.
I named him after my late father.
Okay.
So Tata in Kisi means father.
Okay.
So basically, we just made a series about our kids, and I can tell you a bit of the story if we have time
please,
for that.
No, please.
Yeah. So basically, the story of Uli and Tata is that they're at home one day. It's a very hot day. So they're bored. They go into the store to look for something to play with, and they find this really old, rusty musical instrument. Not rusty, but dusty. And they play them. It's a Noruto and a drum. And when they play these old instruments, they summon a magical bird out of the sky.
Yeah.
And this bird is like, oh, you know, it's been so long, nobody's played these instruments. That's why I've come, since your great-grandparents played these instruments.
Mm-hmm.
And this bird takes them all around Kenya, where they learn songs from all the different communities. And they learn also about the culture of those different places.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think let's go deeper into Uli and Tata.
Yeah.
I wanted to save it for the end, but now it's as good a time as any. Yeah, because I think the way you're doing it is quite, I would say, what's the right word? It's not noble. It's quite impressive. And what impresses me about it, it's not just that you're teaching African nursery rhymes. For me, what captivates me is the how you're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
That if I watched episode 1, I watched the Kakamega episode, I watched the Lamu episode, and I watched the Kilifi. The Mwananyani episode. But you actually go to these places.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
And you capture the stories and record.
Yes.
Local people.
Yes.
Singing the nursery rhymes.
Yes.
So in when you watch the YouTube channel or the Uli and Tata on YouTube or wherever else you watch it, what you hear singing the nursery rhyme is actually children from those communities.
In some cases. In other cases, like with the Kisumu episode, because there are so many Luo musicians resident here in Nairobi, it's very easy to be able to have a studio here in Nairobi and get musicians to come in. Yeah. Much more difficult with other communities who don't have as developed a music industry.
Yes.
So with the case of Gabra, for example, in the Chalbi Desert, we had to actually sign work for hire agreements with the guardians of the children and actually get the music from the source.
Okay.
Yeah. So you don't always have access, with the studio recording facility. So you have to take a team there. You have to take a team there and actually record at the source.
So tell me about the thinking behind that. What did you see in the capturing of those nursery rhymes? Why is it important? Why should we care that these nursery rhymes are there or not? Yeah.
So my partner Sarah is a psychologist, actually.
Yes.
And one thing that she always speaks about is how important a sense of belonging and rootedness is for the mental well-being of a child growing up.
Okay.
Yeah. To feel that I have a right to be here. I belong here. I don't have to make excuses for my existence.
Exactly.
That's so important for a child growing up to be rooted and strong and edified as an adult.
Okay.
Yeah? But when you are always consuming media that does not
you don't see yourself.
You do not see yourself. You do not see the environment that you're from. You don't see the world around you. The subliminal message that you get is that I don't really belong here, which is not great for our mental health. Yeah. And that goes very deep. It goes down. If you want to even speak about it, it even goes to the religious imagery that we are surrounded by.
Yes.
Especially with Christian religion.
Yeah.
On the back of matatus, everywhere you see the image of God that is presented to children is a blonde person.
Yeah.
So we Now, first and foremost, we wanted to remedy that for our own children,
Yes.
and we know that this, what is for us is, human beings. We are not that dissimilar.
Yes.
We all have the same common challenge, and I would hear this complaint constantly from my cousins and friends who are parents. Oh, we don't have something for our children.
Exactly.
And I was like, I cannot join that chorus of complaints because I actually have the skills to do something about it. So I cannot participate in that. We actually have to think about, okay, how can we do it? If it's capital, how do we go about raising the capital to be able to have a team? And it's not easy. Anybody who knows about animation will tell you it's a team sport.
Yes.
Nobody animates an Uli and Tata on their own. We have a team of 35 people.
Okay.
That's everything from music. You have the field music team that actually goes to the location and records the music on sound. You have the studio music team that is working on the studios here in Nairobi doing the music production. We work with Fancy Fingers of Sauti Soul.
Yes.
He does all the mastering and directing of the music. We're a really talented team.
Yeah.
Tim Umali who does the songs themselves, who composes the songs. We benefited from the legacy of Ketebul and what Tabu was able to do with the field recording.
Yeah.
So there's all that background. Man, there's so many people. I'm hesitant to go down names because I'll end up leaving somebody. Just look at the credits. Then you have the studio animation production team from the storyboard artists, visual development, rigging, the animation team, also the post-production people. So it's a huge pipeline. We call it the pipeline. And one person hands the baton to the another, who hands the baton to the another, who hands the baton to the other. So it's a large group of people.
It's evident from what you say about Uli and Tata, that it's going to be big.
Inshallah.
For me,
Inshallah.
But it may not be now, but I can see that it's going to be big. So how do you live?
How do you live?
Yeah, because
the production of Uli and Tata is funded.
Yes.
So our pilot episode was funded by the Kenya Film Commission.
Okay.
Shout out to Kenya Film Commission.
Excellent.
In 2022.
Yes.
And once we had the pilot, we were able to now ship it around to raise further capital.
Okay.
So we got advice quite early on that what you need to do is go to marketplaces.
Yes.
So at the time, there was a marketplace called Discop in Kigali, in Rwanda. So we, got on a plane. But on the way to the plane, we hear that the Discop has been cancelled. The event has been cancelled. That time you've already bought your tickets. You're in the line waiting to go to the aircraft. And we're like,
let's go.
Let's just go. Let's see what happens. There are probably other people there who have already gone. So we just went and, just in Kigali, moving around in the hotels, we happened to meet Serge, who was the cultural attaché of the French embassy at the time.
Yes.
And we met him, we pitched him, and we had nothing for another, 3-4 months. We did events. We did a launch where we did a screening of the pilot, invited people to Unseen Nairobi, small art house cinema.
Yes.
And we screened it to a whole bunch of investors. Not too dissimilar than what you do when you have a minimum viable product.
Agreed. Yeah.
You have to show it to people.
Yeah.
So after a while, Serge got back to us months later, and he told us, I might have something for you. And so Creation Africa was able to fund 7 episodes.
Okay.
In addition, also, I told you that Manu was a National Geographic, is a National Geographic explorer.
Fellow,
So he was also eligible for National Geographic grants, which is what allowed us to go outside of Kenya and go to Tanzania and do episodes with the Hadzabe community in northern Tanzania, and also an episode in Kenya, in Ukambani.
Yes.
So this is how we've been building, because you cannot monetize until you actually have a full season.
Yeah.
Yeah. You need a full season.
What is a full season?
A full season would ideally be 52 episodes.
Okay.
So getting there, there's a lot of funding that it takes to get there.
Yes.
And what we are also doing is making other media like explainer videos, trivia episodes where kids can go in and, okay, now you've watched an episode about Kilifi. What is the forest that Uli and Tata had a picnic in?
Exactly.
Is it A, the Mau forest, B, the Arabuko Sokoke forest, or C, Kakamega forest?
Yeah.
And, like really simple questions like those. So, so all that content also increases the amount of overall content that we have. It's like quencher juice, how you can take the same concentrate and have many cups of juice.
Agreed.
So using that, now we'll be able to distribute. And now on the distribution question, there was another challenge. Unfortunately, the ambition that so many animators have in Kenya is to one day work for for Netflix or Disney or any of the big broadcasters. But the complication is that a lot of them are not available to kids. Like Disney Plus is not available to most kids in Africa. You
Yes.
need a VPN to watch Disney Plus.
Yes.
So there's that irony that what we define as success is being on those platforms, but those platforms do not have a significant presence in Africa. If your goal is for children, you remember how we spoke about the goal is for kids to see themselves represented in media.
Agreed. Yeah.
Now you have to make a choice to go on the platforms that are available to our kids. So starting next week, we'll be on Akili Network.
Yes.
Akili Network here in Kenya, which is free to air for all kids in Kenya, but it's non-exclusive, so we'll also be available on YouTube. And for that, we need a YouTube strategy. So every couple of days in a week, we have a YouTube strategy team who we consult with. We also had a grant from Afrique Creative, which was just dedicated to distribution and marketing. And so the whole point of these meetings is like, how do we work the algorithm, the YouTube algorithm, to eventually monetize at a significant level. And of course, we're also thinking about things like merchandise and everything downstream from that, because a lot of the really big animation brands, and we learned this from learning from Asia as well.
Yeah.
As chairman of the Animation Association, I get a chance to also to meet many different players, including the last was the Asian. There was this company called. When I remember the name, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
But basically, they do like 300 million views in a month for their channel, and they don't even consider their YouTube views. Their primary business model is toys. So they start from their toys and work backwards, and they learned that from the Japanese. So we might not necessarily go as aggressive as that,
yes,
as working backwards, but it is something to think about. That everything is downstream from first and foremost making a compelling story, making a compelling universe that people want to inhabit. Once you have that, then all these other business models open up to you, making pencil cases, making games, making apps, making toys, but you cannot have any of that downstream until you have a compelling story that children actually want to spend time on.
Okay.
And I think that's what we have with Uli and Tata.
So let me take you back to two things that I want us to just touch on. Let's talk about capital. Yeah. Then let's talk about ecosystem.
Yes.
Yeah. So capital from the perspective of you're in a space that is capital intensive.
Yes.
To produce a single episode is more complex and more expensive than most people would think.
Yes.
It's not just drawing on a piece of paper and there you go.
Yes.
So how have you overcome those challenges? And what are your sentiments about the whole capital structure and ecosystem? I guess, do you see yourself? We've talked about the importance for kids, to see themselves. What's been your experience as an African entrepreneur in seeing yourself in the capital structure, in the ecosystem? We talk about the goal being to get to Netflix or to Disney, but are we there? Are we at that table? Maybe we can speak a bit more about that and see where that takes us.
I mean, very much like the other guests who've come on African Do.
Yeah.
Capital is a problem across the board. It's a challenge across the board. Ken spoke about it in the tech sector, how a lot of the capital is not Kenyan or African.
Yes.
Navalai also spoke about it in manufacturing. And if it is the case in tech and manufacturing, you can imagine how much more intense is in creative, which is generally considered a very low priority. So how creative film and storytelling gets funded in other places. Like if you think of, say, Europe, for example, it's very heavily state subsidized.
Okay.
Very heavily. We're just not on the same. We're not in the same stratosphere. Most filmmakers get their start from state funding. Even here in Kenya, we are indirect beneficiaries of state funding from European taxpayers. A lot of the time, if you think of like the contributions that the French make or the Germans make with Goethe Institute and the rest, those are European taxpayers who are paying for that. So basically, our creative industry in Kenya is subsidized by other taxpayers in other countries. And why is this? It's because they understand that what we said in psychology, if you're raising a nation, If you're concerned about nation building, it starts in childhood. It doesn't start with. I don't come to Leonard. If Leonard already has calcified prejudices, ethnic prejudices and all these things, if they're already calcified, you're not going to do much about that. If you have any dream of ever building a nation, it has to start young. So the states take on that responsibility.
Yeah.
There are some things that we have no business talking profit about. Yeah. I don't absolve myself of the responsibility to build a viable business, and we are doing that. However, if you're talking about things like education, those are not profitable things.
Yeah.
We have a country of 50 million people. Many of those children are in far-flung, very remote places where they cannot afford school fees, let alone affording to pay for an app. So what ends up happening when entrepreneurs come into the education space, I see this a lot with like edtech startups, is that you end up serving an already overserved population. You end up already serving the same population that goes to private schools, for example.
Agreed.
Those are the same
and they
people.
have choice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They have an abundance. There's an oversupply for that very, very narrow segment. And for a majority low income population like ours, they don't need another app. They don't need another. They already have so much. If your goal really is to reach kids in Maikona in Marsabit County, then you're not talking profit. That has to start from purpose. Like, is our purpose actually to reach those kids? Same thing applies with healthcare, for example. Do we have an oversupply of healthcare options for people who are willing to pay? What options are there for those who do not? And on and on and on. So that goes back into public interest, public goods discussion.
So if I hear you right, what you're saying, Chief, is that as a nation, we need to rethink how we fund some things.
Yes, it cannot.
It cannot be that
profit.
we are just trying to make this economy and build that. And you take me back to school, to uni, in my uni days, where I learned that the early what we call the European city-states,
yes,
where the states were the funders of the arts, because commercial success was actually based first in a way of thinking, and that way of thinking started with that what you call nation building,
nation building,
and that starts at childhood. So you're basically saying that it is in our interest to fund our creative sector better, because it is what will lead us to greater commercial success.
Everybody, whatever sector you're in, you are all beneficiaries of the cultural output. Like when I was in San Francisco, for example, we once went on a camping trip to the forests there in California, the Big Sur. And I was in the car with, I had a Dutch friend in there. There was a Mexican friend. There was another guy, just different people in the same van. And as a bonding experience, as we were in the van going for camping, everybody shares the music from, you play a song from where you're from. Play a song from where you're from. Play a song. You're in the food side of things. I'm sure this question comes up when you meet if you meet chefs from other parts of the world. They want to know, what do you people eat? Where you're from. You know? Are you going to make them I don't know, pizza?
Yes, exactly.
You want to show them, where you're from. And these are common goods. These are public goods that we share. And I don't know if you're familiar with the whole concept of the tragedy of commons. The tragedy of commons is that there are certain shared resources that we all benefit from. Everyone wants to maximize their extraction of those common goods, but nobody invests in them.
In building them.
And those are things like water, for example. Those are things like air. Those are things like our culture. We all benefit, but because there is no individual profit that you're going to extract from it, nobody is investing back in it. And that space has to be occupied by the state. The state just being our common kitty as a nation. We have to invest in that. there's nothing else to say about that.
Yeah,
Because there are some
yeah.
things that are never going to be profitable. Education for the masses of the Kenyan population will never be profitable. I can tell you that for free.
It can never be
will
a
never
for-profit
be.
enterprise.
It can never be.
Yeah.
The only thing you can do is just serve a segment of a tiny, wealthy or middle to upper class segment of the population. That's all you can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned that because it came up again in Navalayo's podcast with Enda, where if you listen to her in the beginning, she talks about her trigger. And you realize that sports, there are some elements of sports in Kenya that have become very, I dare say, elitist. You know, you like my kids are swimmers, active swimmers. The swimming circuit
Guilty, yeah.
is tough. You know, you can't randomly be a very good swimmer.
Yes.
You need some resources to swim in Kenya.
Yes.
And that's sad because the infrastructural investment is big, and we need pathways,
roads as well.
Roads, yeah.
That's another public good. Yeah.
Exactly. So here you go. You are now Uli and Tata is alive and well.
Yes.
But I think Freehand movement is also still active.
Very much so. Yes.
And maybe I can just double a bit into Freehand movement and ask, how do you that purpose that you have, because you're producing content, how does that translate from a monetary perspective into a successful commercial enterprise that's able to pay you? I know you work with your wife, and so this is like a family business.
Yes.
Yeah. In that you're both earning your keep from there. But how do you ensure that you're able to do this successfully and still meet your purpose, which you're very clear on?
I think the two are fused.
Yes.
There needs not to be any conflict between purpose and profit.
Yeah.
Ideally, there should not be a conflict. Like if somebody is a farmer, I'm the son of farmers, for example.
Yes.
You're making food. It's good for the community and for yourself.
Yes.
And you can sell your surplus and make money.
Okay.
So there's no conflict there.
Okay.
Freehand is more focused on adult-oriented content, and it's mostly client-based.
Yes.
So we work with organizations, different groups who come to us and they want their message translated, whether it's graphic novels, animation, that type of thing. But it's more focused toward an adult audience, whereas Pungulu is focused more toward a younger audience.
I love the name, by the way. Pungulu. I meant to ask, where did that name come from? It sounds like something something is falling. You know? Yeah.
Yeah, it's Manu's mom who came up with it. We wanted something playful that's accessible, and it doesn't really have a meaning. It means what it does to, and it's common in our ecosystem. People know Pungulupa.
In Kiswahili, you know Pungulupa. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, kitu inaanguka.
Inaanguka, yeah. Okay, great.
So for that, Uli and Tata has been mostly funded.
Yeah.
But then now that we are publishing it, other people are realizing, oh my God, there's a pipeline in Kenya, something that was not necessarily obvious before. And now we are coming into a lot of co-productions where people come and they want to produce their stuff with us.
Okay.
I'm not at freedom to mention specifically which those are, but there are some very recognizable big names coming from North America.
Excellent.
Who are also doing with us. Hopefully after time I'll be at liberty to disclose.
Great.
Yeah.
And that earlier, before we started recording the podcast, we were talking about the power of having a seat at the table.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think what you have just described right there with Pungulupa and the potential partnerships that are coming.
Not potential, current.
The current partnerships that have evolved in this space speaks to that.
Yes.
So maybe we can speak a bit about where you currently are and what the future looks like for Pungulupa and also Freehand Movement Studios. Yeah.
I think I would even widen it to even speak about the animation ecosystem as a whole, because I also am chair of the Animation Association
of Kenya.
Yes.
Yes.
And really what we want to do is make strong use case
Yes.
with Uli and Tata to demonstrate that we can make these in Kenya.
Yeah.
Because one of the strong arguments that we were receiving at the start from other people was that, why are you bothering to make this in Kenya? Your costs are going to be so high. You have to do training as well as make. Why not just outsource it to India or that type of thing? And so many of the times, what you hear being advertised as African animations aren't really made here.
Yes.
And a lot of time the ownership isn't here. So it's African in terms of like, yes, the content or the subject might involve Africa, and you might hire a few voice actors, but structurally it's not. So we wanted to change that. And the only way to change that is to go into that commons, invest. One person would have to make that sacrifice and actually invest in building the ecosystem, which is what we try to do with Uli and Tata. Actually having a team of animators who are trained and used to working in a pipeline, and then you can be able to outsource and do this. And then once we've demonstrated that we can bring our costs down into the India range, which would be about $3,000 a minute. If we can, for like 2D animation, if we can get it down into that range, 3,000, they can do anything between $3,000 and $10,000. Once we're in that playing range, then now we are contenders. And there are so many people who want to produce here because we are great English speakers. We get the humor, which is not always the case in a lot of Southeast Asia.
Okay.
A really big outsourcing destination is Philippines, because Philippines both have English advantage as well as being able to understand the humor, which is not necessarily in the case with China. China, they're super fast, but they'll struggle with the English. So in the case of India, they might not be getting the humor for whatever reason. I don't know why it is. So like people don't know, but Kung Fu Panda was entirely made in India. I would say over 90-something% of all the big Hollywood animations that you hear about are made in Asia, Southeast Asia mostly.
Okay.
Yeah. Tom and Jerry is made in Philippines, a lot of it, although the IP holder is in Canada, I believe. So now that wages are rising in Southeast Asia and it's becoming much more competitive, the next destination that folks are looking at is East Africa.
Excellent.
So East Africa, I think, has a huge potential for moving into that space, also doing service work and joining the global animation ecosystem, because we are a global ecosystem. Our training, like we trained with an animation company in France, Rubica. It's very much a global ecosystem, and the sooner we can plug into that, then
the better for us.
The whole ecosystem can rise. And animation is, yes, it's challenging, but it's not as challenging as surgery. And Kenya, we have no problem training surgeons. So
excellent.
So we just have to make that demonstration, which was a strong purpose for doing Uli and Tata and doing it at a high quality. And if I were to look into the crystal ball, I would say 20 years from now, I would say we would be plugged into, not even 20, even less. I would say 10 years. I've been surprised by what's happened in the past year. So
wow.
Yeah.
Chief, what a fabulous conversation. Thank you very much for honoring us with your presence.
My pleasure.
And ladies and gentlemen, Uli and Tata on YouTube channel. Subscribe, watch the episode. I know he says they are for kids, but I started and
100%.
Four episodes in, I hadn't stopped. So even adults, you'll be able to enjoy them. Quite brilliant storytelling. Great to see our African traditional nursery rhymes being captured for posterity. And Chief, maybe you can have a packed-in shop for the guests, anything that you feel you want them to know about both Freehand movement and Pungulu Productions. And wow, what a pleasure having you with us here.
Thank you for hosting me.
Yeah.
If I have any parting shot, I would say it's now time. This is 2024. It's now time for us to go beyond the very easy platitude that we need more African stories. You will not find anybody who will disagree with that. You can walk onto the street and say, "Oh, do we need African stories?" Everybody will say yes. Now we need to actually invest. And I feel like that's where we'll actually make progress. And I'm glad to see that there are people who are making that investment, but we would like to see much more African capital involved in this. So yeah, and for those who are just interested, go to Uli and Tata, Pungulu and enjoy yourself. Yes.
Great. So I want to emphasize and magnify that plea for the African capital to listen to us and what we are saying about our plea to look local in terms of funding opportunities. one of the things we have set out to do here on African Do is tell more stories and hopefully capture the magnitude of the opportunity for investing in all things African. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us for the past hour. And we look forward to having you with us again on episode 8.
Asanteni sana.